Question number 10, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, has he been advised whether the Prime Minister stands by his statement on asset sales that, quote, mixed ownership will free up $5 billion to $7 billion?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I just checked with the Prime Minister and he does stand by his statement. He also advises me he stands by the statement that if the Greens are really opposed to the asset sales policy, then after the referendum they will promise to borrow billions of dollars and buy back the shares. So far they've refused, which the Prime Minister advises me means the Greens don't really mean what they say.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he believe the asset sales program has legitimacy, given that it was passed in this House by a single vote, that of John Banks, a man who received a $15,000 donation from Sky City, which Justice Heath yesterday said these donations were not expressly disclosed in John Banks' return. Rather, they appear to have been classified as having been made anonymously.
Order. We've now got into the difficulty again where we were, where the member's now starting to refer to details of the case. I will invite the member to ask the question again in line with Standing Order 112. Dr. Russel Norman.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker, this is a case that is from yesterday. I am reading the judgment. I am not doing anything else than reading the judgment from Justice Heath from yesterday. It is a settled case. John Banks has gone to trial.
I'll invite the member to repeat the question. If I'm dissatisfied with it this time, I will rule it out of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Finance Minister and asks, does he believe that the asset sales program has legitimacy, given that the deciding vote was that of John Banks in this House, and Mr. John Banks has been found by the courts yesterday to have received 2 donations from a company associated with Kim.com and 1 from Sky City Entertainment? Those donations were not expressly disclosed in the return. Rather, they appear to have been classified as having been made anonymously, as referred to in the judgment by Justice Heath yesterday.
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, the Parliament passed the legislation. The Supreme Court examined the whole process. The Financial Markets Authority examined the whole process. A whole lot of interested investors bid on the shares and legally received their share certificates, and we now have $4 billion in the bank. $4 billion we don't have to borrow off foreign bankers in the way that member will need to if he decides to buy back the assets.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why did Treasury advise the government in the budget policy statement that asset sales would increase the government's deficit as measured by the operating balance excluding gains and losses, the standard measure of the deficit?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think as we've discussed in the House before, there's a number of ways of measuring the impact of asset sales on the government's fiscal balance. The calculations that have been done under one version show it's mildly positive, another version mildly negative, and a third version roughly neutral. But as I explained to the member this morning at the committee, the impact directly on the government's balance was not the main driver of the sales. The government set out its objectives for this process some time ago. The real question now is, though, that if the referendum votes a majority against the asset sales, will the Greens and Labor take the referendum seriously and promise to buy the assets back?
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has he actually read the budget policy statement where Treasury says that the asset sales program will increase the government's deficit, and won't that increase in the deficit now be larger because he has raised less money than originally projected?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the member's question points to the problem with those calculations, and that is they're all hypothetical. For instance, if the government still owned those assets, the fact is they would be worth considerably, we now know they'd be worth considerably less today than what is on the government's books. And the Treasury actually hasn't done that calculation. So it's actually pretty meaningless. The most important issue is that the government's debt is at least $4 billion lower than it otherwise would be. But if the Greens can get round to promising to buy the assets back, which you'd think they would, judging from their criticism of the sales process, then they'll have to go and raise at least $4 billion of debt to buy them back.
Question number 11, the Right Honourable